This morning so far we've looked at government structures, key areas to tackle climate change, innovative projects, support for these projects and the infrastructure around them. So we've got time for maybe about 10 minutes Q&A. So does anybody have any questions that they put to the panel? There's somebody over there in the corner. There's a roving mic. If you could stand up when you get the mic and say who you are and where you're from.
Hi, that's loud. Keith Baker, Glasgow Caledonian University. I'd just like to take us back to RPP2 because we've done some work on it. We did do some work, then input into it, and we're also doing a lot on fuel poverty. And there seems to be a circle here that we really, really need to square. We've just published work showing that rural households are spending significantly more and using significantly more on energy. That's above what the latest figures from DEC and the latest figures from Scottish Government are suggesting. We're just, by the way, if you're a housing association or local authority, putting in for some money to do some more work on this, and we are looking for partners, so please find me. But plug aside, that gap is not factored into RPP2. RPP2 is obviously based on the assumption that RPP1 has been met, the targets, the measures. And we know full well from having worked on RPP2 that the assumptions going into that were basically over-representing the savings that were expected to find from the built environment, which are proportionately more than the 80% target because the Scottish Government sees that you can do more from the built environment. I think we and maybe the ST would actually question some of that. But I'd just like some general comments on how we seem to be going to be able to square this circle, bearing in mind that some of those fuel-poor households who are going to be lifting out of fuel poverty are going to be significantly contributing emissions because some of them will be switching their heating on for the first time.
Thank you. Would you like to maybe start, John?
That was quite a dense question. Sorry, dense in the sense of highly packed with information. I'm not quite sure I understood fully. I think there are 2 points I would make, I think. First of all, at a very general level, I think the interrelationship between energy efficiency and fuel poverty is particularly important, and it's one that our ministers are acutely aware of. And in fact, a lot of the sort of the weight in terms of public expenditure and its direction towards domestic energy efficiency is on the basis of that link between fuel poverty and carbon savings. So in terms of the high level, where are we sort of pushing our efforts? I think I agree entirely with what's been said in terms of the importance of this and the multiple benefits. The other sense that I picked up from the question was of perhaps issues with some of the modelling that underlies the RPPs. And I think here that what's happening, or what has happened, is that we're having an evolution of technology in terms of modelling. And RPP1 and RPP2 were done using what I sort of loosely call first generation modelling, which is often very straightforward projections on a number of assumptions, which are quite fixed and hard to manipulate. And we're now in a world in which we have second generation models, and WWF have done some fantastic work on this, and they've commissioned some really interesting work with what are sort of second generation models which allow much better sort of manipulation of assumptions. And what the government is doing is investing in what I loosely call a third generation model, which gives us the ability to play around with assumptions, sort of both macro assumptions and something that Gina was talking about in terms of EU policies, for example. Basic sort of macroeconomic assumptions like GDP growth, which are very hard to play around with in first generation models, but also allows us to sort of do some of the work which is previewed in our heat generation policy statement, modelling work there, which allows us to think about technologies and adaptation and adoption of those technologies and different technologies and their costs, and do that across all sectors. So the government is investing a lot of resource in moving towards this third generation modelling, It's going to underpin RPP3 and make RPP3, I think, a much more realistic document in terms of its ability to look at different scenarios, think about different pathways to the same objectives, and therefore making the sort of choices that we face as a country sort of easier to to look at and sort of find our way through.
Thanks. Gina, I don't know if you maybe wanted to add something there.
Sure. Just to agree with John, I think a much more nuanced approach to the way we model our energy system is required for RPP3, and I know there's a lot of work underway at the moment to develop a new energy systems model for the Scottish Government. I think on the RPP2, in a way, it was kind of a blunt instrument in many ways. So even having said that, it is our benchmark, our guidance for what needs to be done and how we need to deliver it. So I think it is critical that we don't just leave this kind of work and thinking to RPP3, but already start to reflect on how we can improve and flex in those new assumptions in RPP2 over the next 18 months before we have a full RPP3.
Great, thanks. Any more questions? Gentleman there in the grey shirt.
Yeah. Declan Finney from University of Edinburgh and SPICE. It's more for the first couple of speakers, really. Do you think we can sufficiently reduce our impact on climate without looking at changing our diet and the carbon footprint associated with that?
Gina, do you want to? Oh, yeah?
I'd like to say something about that, actually, because one of the things that I was thinking when I was hearing people talk about, you know, our diet, as I decided as my New Year resolution that I'd stop eating beef, simply because I read an article about how much land, how much carbon is used up to put 1,000 calories on the table. So I actually do think that there are personal things and dietary things that we will need to do to make changes. But the problem for me is that I really don't believe that we know, that we understand, we might know this stuff, but we understand the relationship that all of these things have. And that's why I think there needs to be such greater, clearer information available to people so that people can make these choices and know why they're doing it. But I personally think that, yes, the human being and our diet will be something that becomes very, very big in the next in the next decade.
And I guess what John was saying earlier really was, it's about behaviour change, really, isn't it?
Yes, I think behaviour change is key here, and I think it's a very wide issue, and I think it has to come. You know, individuals can make choices, for sure, but I think when we're dealing with this issue, we have to find ways of thinking behaviour change of the population as a whole, and we have to find ways in which we can encourage people to do things, and that's just at a very, very general level. The example I used, of what transport decisions that you take in the morning, I think those sorts of things are really key, and finding ways in which we can sort of achieve what we need to achieve through behaviour change is important, and it really is intensely complex. It's not just about making a decision about whether you eat beef or lamb or something like that. It's really tough.
Okay. I think we've got time for one other question. Anybody here? Gentleman in the centre there? Just wait on the microphone.
I don't want to drive the Scottish industry badly.
I think all five of the presentations were showing the love in terms of the momentum of putting this vital part of saving the planet. But this morning I was watching the BBC News, and they said that the stock market is back up to the level of when the dot-com era was. So that we've actually got, wealth is not the issue. I believe the issue that we've got to do now and it comes from the dot-com era. We've got to realise that we're not an industrial society. We've moved on, we're a mix, we're a knowledge-based, but more importantly, particularly in Scotland, we're great innovators in terms of resolving problems, making improvements. And one of the things that I would want to suggest, even though you may be 5 disparate organisations, I'm a member of the Institution of Engineering Technology. And one of the things that we did 10 years ago is really move into the digital environment of not just working from top down, bottom up. We worked bottom up, sideways, and we actually extended the reach and the value by going into that kind of environment. And also, I've noticed in terms of the UK government, they've now made I think, a slow progress of moving chief technical officers on company boards. But one of the things that I can think we can do now with the professional institutions is to, instead of having this large separation, let's come together more. Because as I say, I started off, we see the love, but I think we can actually make it really practical. And actually, okay, you may have had 3 failures, but I would say, in terms of today, we're sitting, we're back up to that level. We're not in austerities now. We've got a real energy of actually moving things forward. And I would hope that now that we can actually go away from here, including yourselves, and say, right, let's make a real commitment and meet a energy target or whatever it is. But also in doing that, create the momentum so we've actually showing that Scotland really can bat above its weight. Thank you.
Anybody like to? Stephen, John?
I'll do that. I couldn't agree more, and it may be a small piece in terms of there's a lot of organisations in this space, but the stuff I talked about getting Scottish Government with Scottish Enterprise, High, SFT, and I actually didn't mention, but Resource Efficient Scotland are a key part of this, and getting us all together, physically together on a weekly basis, but also, as you say, using technology. It only started in January, but I think it's already making a dramatic difference in terms of how we share information and work together. So I agree that's on a relatively small scale to what I assume you're talking about, but I think it's, it's, in some ways it's a big start.
Okay, anybody else want to? Yeah, Gina. Yeah.
Can I just briefly reflect on the issue of the stock market and the fact that it's now bounced back to its 1999 levels? I think, austerity isn't over, and we haven't solved the wealth issue probably. There are huge inequalities that exist in our society, and I think one of the really important things that we can do here in Scotland is put social justice front and centre of our approach to climate change. And I think, if we can kind of think about fuel poverty, income inequality and all of those kind of things in the transition and make sure that we protect the most vulnerable, that's a really critical thing that we need to focus on. But I absolutely agree with you that digital technology has been transformational. I think we can use it to kind of create a lot of excitement and momentum, particularly with young people, but right across Scottish society. So yeah.
Great, I think that wraps it up. I think that was a really good question to end on. We've got a great opportunity, and that's why we're all here, really. So I'd like to say thank you very much to our speakers. We're going to break till 11:05 to get us back on track. So we've got about 20 minutes. You can pop upstairs to the networking zone. I'd like you to give a round of applause to our speakers, actually. Thank you.